Welcome to the Grief Show. My name is Travis Swearengen, and I will be your host as I unpack the difficult and very broad topic of grief. I'll be interviewing therapists, widows, fathers, mothers, sons, daughters, and so much more. I wanted to take a moment to explain what my heart is behind the Grief Show. As I've made posts about the show to my social media following, I've had a lot of mixed reactions, everything ranging from "this is needed" to "why would you do that?" Who does this, right? Who in their right mind would want to talk for hours on end about such a depressing topic, and who would even listen? In all honesty, I would have felt this way a few years ago too. This all changed for me on February 5th of 2020 when I got a call from my mom that my dad had passed away after a tough battle with diabetes and heart disease. My dad's death completely shook my world up. He was my closest friend, my rock when times got hard, and my hero. What happened throughout my year was interesting. I had people reach out with relatable stories of loss and hardship. Through these stories, I began to realize some important truths. One is that grief is something that almost all of us will experience at some point. This is because everyone you have ever loved or cared about will one day pass away. Two is that most people could relate with feeling isolated in their grief, even when their families were grieving the same person. And three, society is really uncomfortable with the topic of grief. This means that almost all of us have felt or will feel the isolating sorrow that grief is, but we will hold it in and grieve in silence. That is why I'm doing this show. The goal of the Grief Show is to tell the stories of those that we've lost, to help us realize that we aren't alone in our grief, and to build a community around the show for us to discuss these topics together. So while I'm eager to start interviewing and collecting content for the show, you have no reason to listen to me. That's why I'm starting off the Grief Show by sharing my personal story with grief. I'll be sharing about the loss of my dad and how his death inspired me to start this podcast. I can't ask someone to publicly share their story with grief if I'm not willing to do so myself. After this episode, I'll begin interviewing experts, therapists, and others so that we can learn and grow together. As I continue to get more feedback in the Grief Show community, I'll start catering the format to what you guys want to hear and what is being helpful. Also, if you want to chat with others that are interested in the topic of grief, we'd love to have you in the Grief Show community. All you have to do is search for the Grief Show community on Facebook. It's a private group, so you'll need to request access to it, and we'll get it to you ASAP. Thank you guys, and let's get going with the show. Hey, man.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm okay, man. This is quite an exciting project for you.
Yeah, this is definitely the weirdest project I've ever done. It's just been such a nerve-wracking thing as like the date has approached for launch, and man, like I actually just recorded that intro as we were sitting here just now, and I tried to actually do an episode 0 like monologue type episode where I just kind of explain what the Grief Show is and why I want to do it and expectations and all of that. And I must have done that monologue about 100 times on Saturday, and I couldn't get through the whole thing without like stumbling or having a bunch of problems or misspeaking or getting frustrated with myself. And it's like that just flowed super well. Like that was like 1 or 2 takes, and It was good to go. So I don't know. I'm definitely feeling good. But this is definitely the weirdest project I've ever done. Period. For context, Caleb and I are business partners in a brand agency called Monsoon, and we do a business podcast called Disruption and Kindness. And so I'm used to doing podcasts or creating content, but the subject matter is completely different. I'm always talking about marketing content or branding content or whatever else, and so this is a complete departure from anything I've ever tried to tackle in my professional career at all.
Yeah, I think it's weird too because you can study most topics to become an expert.
Right.
Right. And I think that grief is completely different. you encounter it when you least expect it. It's not something you normally plan for.
Sure.
And I think that it's also pretty invalidating when you experience it, just because you've seen grief and now you've experienced it and you're still processing through it. I bet it feels like a really weird project to now become a spokesperson on behalf or a connector for grief, compared to marketing, which you can take classes and feel like you have a handle on it. And you're preemptively seeking out knowledge compared to grief, which is much more, I think, reactionary and trying to put the pieces together. So I can see how even communicating or talking about it can be difficult. I did want to say it's somewhat beautiful that it took you so many takes and it was stumbling and it was rough when you were trying to do it by yourself. But just sitting down here and just me being in the room and getting some small feedback and having somebody with you, like I think that's almost the entire point and purpose of this podcast is to take people who are by themselves and struggling and fumbling and then putting them into a situation where they can not feel disconnected or like that they're just doing this solo. So to me, I think it's
Fitting
indeed that even the intro didn't work by yourself.
Sure. Yeah. It's just crazy. I mean, so my dad died February 5th of 2020. And you were the very, very first person that I called after I got the call from my mom. And I just remember just not knowing what in the world was going on and what was going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And we got through like the initial like phase and shock of the whole thing. And we did the funeral, and I had so many people texting me and checking on me and doing the whole thing. And then, you know, everyone just moves on with their lives, right? Everyone just like kind of goes and does their own thing, and it's kind of out of their head a little bit. And so grieving people are left kind of holding this thing that's
Mm-hmm.
like completely rocked and just shaken their entire world up, and everyone's moved on around them. And I don't blame them. I've done that myself when other people have passed. I've done that when other people have passed since my dad's passed, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I understand that it's easy to move on with your life, but I started getting to like all these messages from people that have been kind of dealing with grief for a long time, and they're like, give me metaphors and examples and things that they did that helped them and whatever else. And it's like there's like this community around grief, but it's like it's kind of hidden,
Mm-hmm.
and it's in private messages, and it's in, you know, one-on-one encounters, and it's not really brought to the forefront. And so you have so many people that are grieving and going through this who feel like they're by themselves. And so the entire point of what I wanted to do with this show was to bring to light the like how common grief is, like how common of a struggle this is, and how all of us will deal with this. But to kind of almost normalize it a whole lot more, and maybe bring all of us a little closer together.
Yeah. Grief, I think it's around, like, statistically speaking, the last time that I checked on it, it was like 150,000 people die every single day.
Sure.
And it's like just to encounter that, those are fathers and mothers, family members, relationships, etc., that people are walking through. And I think especially in American culture, I loved your intro and even talking about it that in the West, we don't have a culture that gives room for grief
Sure.
and the process of grieving. I think that we have funerals, we have rituals, we have, pouring one out, memorials for people, but I do not think that we understand or want to look at as an American culture the process and lengthy process that somebody goes through in grief.
Sure.
It's so much longer, and I think we have a short attention span for suffering and pain and things that make us uncomfortable. So even your best friend, even family members, even other people will respond differently when grief happens and it hits them. And I think that even the most supportive people in the world will come alongside you and sit with you for a couple of days, sit with you for a week, and then kind of expect things to start getting back to normal, and they want to move on with their life even though you haven't fully processed that out. And I think that what you're doing with this podcast is needed and necessary to start normalizing a conversation around grief because I don't think people are having this conversation in the open. I think they're having it with their counselors. I think they may be having it internally, but I don't think that we have not seen a culture that normalizes this. So I think it's very
Sure.
necessary.
Yeah. It's kind of weird to say that I'm excited about doing the podcast, but it's like I'm going to be talking to mothers that have lost their kids. I'm going to be talking to, men that have lost their wives. I'm going to be talking to so many different people about such a hard topic, but I'm still kind of excited about it. And
Yeah.
it's a real conflicting kind of feeling to be excited about doing a project like this. I just know that it's important.
Yeah.
I just know that it's an important thing to do, and I feel super drawn to the project.
Yeah. Well, tell me about your dad.
Yeah, man. So I was born in 1991. So 30 years ago, my dad became a dad, and he was about to be 41. So he got a super late start having kids. And he found out that the year that I was born that he had diabetes. And so my entire life kind of and my entire home life in some way revolved around my dad's blood sugar level. We were constantly checking it or making sure he wasn't too high or too low.
Right.
And we would have these like it'd feel like every few years there'd be some level of a crisis. Like it'd be too low and he'd fall down, or like he'd, there'd be some issue while he was driving, or like there was just all these little episodes and problems, and it just kind of kept you on your toes. You're kind of wondering, like, hey, like, is everything okay? Like it was just this really scary, unstable feeling. Like my parents had a super great marriage, like top 3 married couples I've ever experienced in my life were my parents. My dad had no issues financially providing for us. So like we felt like from a familial standpoint, things were really stable. But um, when you have like this blood sugar level kind of looming overhead, like you're just kind of really worried about it
Right.
constantly. Like the you kind of realize your dad's mortality pretty early on, and it's definitely a hard thing to carry. And so about 5 years ago, I was living in Fort Worth, and I was getting my master's degree. And December rolled around, and it's time for Christmas break. And I was going to drive 4 hours to Lubbock, Texas, where I'm from, to just hang out with my parents for like 2 or 3 weeks before going back to Fort Worth. And I got this knock on my door at 4 in the morning one morning from my mom, and she's like, "Hey, Travis, are you awake? Something's wrong with your dad." And so I hopped out of bed and I ran into their room, and my dad was just really incoherent and just kind of cooing a lot, and just he wasn't really there, and he wasn't coherent, and he couldn't answer anything I was asking him. And so we called 911. They came and got him, and they said his blood sugar had dropped all the way down to 38. And so they got him loaded up in the ambulance, took him off to the hospital, and by the time I got there, he was completely coherent again, smiling from ear to ear, eating a ham sandwich, totally fine. The hospital ham sandwich, there's no telling how much that cost.
Sure.
But it definitely woke me up, to just like how serious my dad's illness was, and what he was going through, and like the efforts my mom was putting in to care for him and to keep him going. And I would just get calls like my dad collapsed at work. Can you come and get him? Like he was just having all kinds of just different issues with his blood sugar, and it felt like over the last like 5 years he was going to the hospital more often for it, or
Right.
he was it was just becoming more and more frequent than it was whenever I was a kid. And I started to kind of sense, I'm like, I think that I really need to get home, So I packed up everything I had, And I moved back to Lubbock. I dropped out of grad school, gave up the career that I wanted to pursue, and kind of started back over in Lubbock. But at least I was close to home, and I could be there to help my mom out. And so in 2019, during the summertime, my dad, he was adjusting this mirror that he had in his shower, and it's something that he used to shave with in the shower all the time.
Mhm.
And he dropped it on his foot, and it shattered and just like cut this huge gash into the top of his foot. And for those of you that don't know, diabetics have really bad problems with their feet and their extremities when they get cut, and they deal with a lot of like neuropathy and lack of blood flow. And so if you get a wound on your foot like that, it's really, really hard to heal that up.
It's very serious. Yeah.
And so we took him to his doctor and started getting him on some antibiotics just to kind of keep it going. But what we didn't know is he had a blood clot in the back of his right knee that was probably preventing some of that medicine from getting there. And so his foot got infected anyways. And the wound got so bad and got so infected that it started to cause his body to go into diabetic ketoacidosis. And so when we first got him into the hospital in the fall of 2019, start kind of looking at his overall situation, he's constantly going into diabetic ketoacidosis. He's got this super infected foot. They told us he had a perfectly healthy heart. Like for reference, like they said his heart looked phenomenal. Like there wasn't any problems.
Mm-hmm.
But the infection in his foot was causing the DKA to happen, which was destroying his heart very quickly. So it's like his heart was just rapidly aging.
Yeah.
Just, I don't even know how many years it'd be, but like he went from a perfectly healthy heart to having a super wrecked, messed up heart that his cardiologists were worried about. And so they had to decide if they wanted. They could either risk further DKA happening and try and fight the infection in the foot and save his foot, or we could remove the foot and get rid of that infection source and try and prevent any more DKA
Damage.
from
Mm-hmm.
happening and prevent any more damage to his heart. So we opted to have his right foot amputated, and the big plan was to get him on a prosthetic leg and to get him back into the workforce because that's what he wanted to do. And so that was the big goal. And so we did just that. I mean, we worked really hard in physical therapy. We got him strong. We worked on his amputated leg to get him healed up to where he could handle a prosthetic. We got him a prosthetic and just got him used to walking again and getting into a good spot. And in February, we think that he went into cardiac arrest and died because his heart had been so damaged from DKA. And so it was definitely a shock. I just started dating my now wife, and we were at her place. We were ordering Thai food, and I got this call from my mom, and she goes, "Travis, where are you?" And I said, "I'm at Bailey's house. Why?" And she goes, "Your dad is gone." And I was like, "What do you mean? Like, where did he go?"
Mm-hmm.
Because like, he was super independent. He'll just take off
Sure.
and do his thing, And she goes, "No, your dad is dead." And I remember getting up and just kind of quietly leaving Bailey's place, getting in my car and making that drive. And I called you. You're the first person that I called because I just didn't know. I just had so many really close friends that knew my dad really well that I felt like deserved this, like, I need to be in person. I need to let them know,
Sure.
that kind of thing. But like, you and I were just really, and still are, just such tight friends. And I don't know, it just felt like I needed to call you. So I gave you a call and made the drive back and dealt with the police and everything that happens with that. And so we got his body sent off with the police, and handled the funeral. What's super kind of interesting and beautiful is that the funeral director that took care of my dad is actually my now father-in-law.
Mm.
So the first time that my dad met Bailey's dad was actually in that situation, which was kind of weird, but kind of interesting at the same time. But yeah, it was definitely the weirdest season I've ever been in my entire life. I had just started this new business, or I jumped into a new business with you guys, and was just trying to figure out like what I needed to do, what I needed to get done. My dad had died. It just you're in this spot where you just feel so confused. It's just like shell shock. It's not really
Mm-hmm.
pain. It was just confusion and not really understanding, what was going to happen. And I felt like I had been so prepared for this to go down. I mean, I think I had told somebody 4 months before he went that I thought my dad was going to die within the next 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
So I was mentally prepared for it, or for what I thought it was going to be like. And then when he passed, you just kind of run into things you weren't expecting. Like I caught myself like I think Patrick Mahomes bought part of the Kansas City Royals, and I wanted to call and talk to my dad about it. And
Yeah.
I had his phone number dialed on my cell phone driving down Indiana Avenue, and I had to stop myself and go, wait a minute, like I can't do that anymore.
Right.
That felt weird, like there's all these urges or these like habits you might have regarding like communication with your family, and you kind of realize like that's over forever. And
Mm-hmm.
like I just had these like moments like that throughout the year. I'm still having them. But yeah,
I think like grief and the way that I've seen it encountered is it's so there's a fascinating piece of it to me, but it's incredible. It's like a bomb goes off when someone dies and they pass away, and there's shrapnel that happens, and depending on how close of proximity you are to the person that passed, I think it inflicts a greater wound. And I've seen it happen with my wife. Her mom passed away, and she has 8 siblings, and it's watching how it affected each of them completely differently was so like odd to witness as a bystander on the outside. It was my mother-in-law, but weren't super close. But watching how the closest siblings to the mom took it so hard, and yet other ones like were processing it by grieving immediately, and there were yet other siblings that wanted to just make jokes and try and process that way, and there were other ones that didn't want to talk about it at all, didn't even want to look at it or be a part of it. And to me, it was like the picture I got was this like bomb going off in the center and shrapnel hitting, where every single person that's close to that bomb gets wounded. But how they manifest that wound is completely different. And you're probably seeing the same thing between your mom and your sister and you, where it's like you all encountered the same event, but how one of you has a limp, one of you lost an eye, one of you,
sure,
struggling to like it manifests differently, and
right,
that also makes it incredibly difficult to talk about grief, even amongst people that you're close to that experience the same event, because how one person is processing it may not feel correct or appropriate compared to how you're wanting to process it, and finding new ways of communication, I think, is like the felt loss, I think, is what continues so long, like where you're shocked and surprised is something that I hear pretty consistently from people, that it hits you at the most random times.
sure,
You see something that it doesn't even, and immediately there's this rush of connection and having to deal with it again when you weren't even thinking about it, right?
sure.
And I'm curious, like you shared that story so well, and even as you've been processing, like you said you were mentally prepared for kind of what was coming up ahead, but the experience of it being completely different than what you were even like mentally knew was coming. Like, what do you think like you felt the loss like the most in? Like, where are you feeling that like what do you like clearly your dad is not here, but
Sure.
what is the felt like loss? Have you processed through that?
So I had incredible anxiety after he had passed when milestones were approaching. That's what I definitely remember the most. So he died in February, so you've got a whole year of milestones to hit. So you've got My birthday, I was turning 29.
Right.
In May, you had my parents' 35th, 36th wedding anniversary, however long they've been married. I think it's 35th wedding anniversary coming up, and uh, you had my sister's birthday and his birthday were a day apart, and so we always did this joint thing for them together. And I used to like really dread, like, man, how am I going to be there for my sister for her birthday? Because this was her birthday wasn't her own; it was my dad's too. And
Sure.
like we did this thing, and now they can't do that thing together. And then you have Father's Day, like, oh my gosh, it's Father's Day. Like I'm just like so freaked out by how I'm going to be on Father's Day.
Mm-hmm.
And then my mom's birthday, and you just have all of the things. The beginning of football season. My
Sure.
my dad and I were huge sports fans, massive Kansas City Chiefs fans my whole life. And so like watching the Chiefs together without him like was really weird. And I would dread these things, but for me, the day those things would like when those times get here, so like Father's Day, I was really nervous about Father's Day. That was a big one. I thought that I was going to be just beside myself with grief. And I actually had a really good day on Father's Day. I had a great birthday. My first birthday without my dad was actually one of my favorite birthdays ever. Um, my dad's funeral day, for example, he died on the 5th. His funeral was on the 13th. I was really dreading it. I'm like, I'm supposed to be super sad and like feel,
Sure.
like crap on my dad's funeral day, right? But it was actually one of my favorite days of all time because all my family and friends came together and we hung out, and it was actually a really fun day. It was a good day, and so it's like I almost grieved those days before they got there, and then by the time
Mm-hmm.
they got there, I was not even upset. Or one thing that really uh, scared me was my wedding day.
Mm-hmm.
So I got married that following December, and I just kept thinking, man, I'm going to just my wedding day is going to be pretty trash for me, just because I love her with my entire heart, but like the most important person to my life before her has died, and his absence, going into that new phase of life without him
Mm-hmm.
there, like he's not going to see how I am as a husband. He's not going to get to know Bailey like I wanted him to. He's never going to meet his grandkids if we have children one day.
Sure.
Like those are things that are never going to happen. And so that was looming overhead whenever I got married. And my wedding day, I actually could have completely cared less if he was there or not, because the day was so beautiful and great, and
Right.
I was totally fine. So it's like, I don't know, the way I handled milestones really freaked me out, but it kind of like caused me to like grieve those things in advance, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It's interesting to me. So like you'd process through these bigger events and were anxious about it, but ended up having like pretty great
sure,
days. I think that me knowing a little bit more kind of leading up to those, like the weeks before he passed away, I think there's some really, really cool moments that happened. Some kindnesses, I would say,
sure,
early on that I think that people would love to hear about too. Um, but like what a, like just looking back, I think you making the decision to move back 5 years before, having time, not knowing when. I know my wife and I moved back to Denver, um, and she got 2 to 3 years with her mom before she passed.
sure,
And like looking back for her, how grateful she is for that time to not have been in another city, to not have been so busy with life, to not have been going a different direction, that she missed time with her mom, right?
sure.
And so I think that it's cool that you did move back. That's part of the story, that you had those 5 years of being close and having things uh, work out that way. But um, you guys have been big Kansas City Chiefs fans, right?
Mhm. Yep, the whole time
Yep.
before
And
the bandwagon.
and then I just I'm hoping you're thinking the two memories that I'm thinking of that are super kind, that happened. So stuff you got to share with your dad, and even the night before he passed away, um, we were at the children's home.
Oh yeah, man. This was so funny, and I get this all the time now, but it was really cool to get this while he was alive.
Mhm.
Um, Caleb and I had a video shoot at the Children's Home of Lubbock. We were trying to donate some media to them, and one of the guys that was talking about his experience with adoption
Mhm.
was wearing like I think it was either a Xylem or a Gould's Pump shirt. My dad worked at they're the same company, but my dad worked there for a couple decades. And after the shoot, we were putting up, getting everything ready, saying goodbye to everyone, talking, and I was like, "Hey, man, my dad actually worked there for a few decades." And he's like, "Well, who's your dad?" I said, "Randy Swearengen." He goes, "Randy Swearengen's your dad? That dude's a legend."
Yeah, without skipping a beat.
Without skipping a beat. It was
Mhm.
so crazy. It's like, who gets that kind of feedback about, your dad? It's just crazy.
Yeah, and that was literally the day before your dad passed.
That was the day before he passed, and then, I think a day or 2 before that was when the Kansas City Chiefs went to the Super Bowl and won it. So, it was just really cool to kinda see my dad be so happy finally getting to see the Chiefs, you know, win after so long of not being able to go to the Super Bowl. And I don't know, it was actually a really cool week. Um, Another thing that happened that I thought was really, really interesting is, uh, one of his best friends, had his funeral, um, probably a week or 2 before he died. And so we go to this funeral, and it's all the same people that went to my dad's funeral, all the exact same people, all his
Mhm.
relationships from over the years, like work people, just crazy. And everyone would walk up and talk to him, and they let him know what he meant to them. And it was really powerful for me to watch, just because it's like my dad kind of got a glimpse at what his funeral is going to be like, and like the amount of people that would come, and what they would share and say to him, and the kind of stuff that they said to him, or the things that they said to me whenever I gave them the call that he had died. And I don't know, it was really beautiful and weird and crazy, but um, yeah, definitely some grace there for sure.
Yeah, I think few people get that opportunity. You know what I
Sure,
mean? I think most people pass, it's unexpected, and you kind of don't know how people felt about you.
sure. Yeah,
So
you have
for
no
your dad
idea.
to get that opportunity to just have people tell him to his face like what he means, like that's
Crazy.
incredibly valuable. Um and beautiful. And I
Yeah,
know that like a lot of the people reaching out, like you said, even after your dad passing away, and I think the response about the grief show has been insane. It's
yeah,
been phenomenal. People that are reaching out and having stories and wanting to talk. I think that this is an untapped conversation that needs to happen.
sure,
And I have thoughts on like the trajectory inside of even just American culture in
sure.
regards to death and how we approach it. And um, in a small way, it's like when we had small town America happening,
Right.
the cemetery was in the center of the town. You walked by it on the way to church. Like
Yep.
legitimately, as you're walking to the general store, as you're walking to places, the cemetery was right
Right.
there. And so you had to take stock of death. Even as kids growing up, we played Oregon Trail, and you're just so aware of
Sure.
anything that could go wrong. And as life expectancy increases, you also see that cemeteries are placed further and further away from places that we have to interact with or even look at. And I
Sure.
think that we try and live in a headspace in American culture where never us. It's not going to happen to us, even
Sure.
though it's gonna happen to everyone. It's 100% fatality is the world that we live in right now. Um, so it is gonna happen to us, but I think that most people view it almost like a dark or macabre or something like that, where you're just dwelling on death too much. But um, it's it's not. I think we need to have a conversation about how short time is. I think I don't know how to
Sure.
spend my time. I'm a father of 5, and I have a wife, and I think that the times that my heart gets caught with how much of a gift today is are the days that I'm the best dad, are the
Sure.
days that I'm the best husband because it's precious, and I'm getting to soak in something that's real right now instead of regretting missing. And I think that even people that haven't experienced grief in the way that you have, or the people that are going to be speaking on it, I think it's incredibly important conversation for us to have as a culture to realize the limited time that we have to make an impact, to soak in life and relationships, to pursue meaningful things. Um, this is all part of that conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't know. I just couldn't be more grateful for coming back to Lubbock and spending the time that I had with him and all of that. Just seeing the writing on the walls and coming back and just being there for him, I think for me has been a great comfort because I got a lot of closure out of that. I think if I'd continued with my master's degree and I'd done everything I could to get my educational accolades going, I could have gotten the best job,
Mm-hmm.
possible, and I still would have. I sort of lived a lot of my life with regret,
Yeah.
not having gone back, and so I don't know. For me, I'm incredibly grateful for it.
Yeah, and even your goal for masters and even the businesses that you first started included your dad at a pretty heavy. Like you had a
Oh,
very intense personal goal in regards to your father,
oh
right?
yeah. Like my entire entrepreneurial goal was to retire my dad. That was that was it for me. I mean, he gave up decades of doing what he loved to do so that he could support my mom and my sister and I. Like he worked his tail off to give me the life that I had. And so I so desperately wanted to retire him and give him a taste of the good life, and I didn't get to do it. I wasn't fast enough. But
Is there regret there on that?
I it definitely bothers me sometimes for sure. But all I can do now is take what he did for me and pay it forward. And so I need to be a really great husband like he was. And one day I need to be a really, really great father like he was. And I need to treat the people I work with really well, like human beings, and like love them and defend them and do all the things that he did. Like I need to pay that forward. And so that's kind of the new goal. Um, One of the things that my mom told me, I did my dad's eulogy, and I'm like, what is something interesting about your marriage with dad that you'd want people to know? And I quoted her in the eulogy. She said that your dad never said a single unkind thing to me, which is like kind of mind blowing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Especially if you knew my dad.
Sure. After 35 years.
My dad was definitely a firecracker for sure, and he'd been married to her for 35 years, but yeah, she said he never said one unkind thing to me ever, and so I'm trying to do that with my wife. Whenever Bailey and I have conflict, like I'm reminded, like I need to handle the situation graciously. I need to, you know, not say unkind or insulting things to her. I need to work through this maturely, and I need to, because like I've had this example now going forward, and so I'm trying to take a lot of what I've learned from my dad and put it into practice into my life, and that's how I'm going to repay him now instead of trying to retire him.
Yeah. It seems like a lot of your effort and energy and focus and goals was around taking care of him.
Sure.
And it seems more now that you've shifted all that. I remember kind of like in the month after, the 45 days after your dad had passed away, you were kind of commenting on how few doctor's appointments you had to go to. And you're just trying
Yeah.
to figure out all this excess time and space that used to be taken up by so much care that happened. And I think
Sure.
you've shifted from taking care of him to carrying on as him.
There's there's this incredibly strange sense of relief you get when they go. Like if they've been like going through all the medical problems that he had, you're taking him to cardiologist appointments, you're taking him to see his general prac, and you're taking him by the brace place to go look at his prosthetic and to
Hmm.
see how that's going. And he's,
You're taking him out driving.
yeah. So I went to DC to go see some friends, and it was like my first time kind of being away from them since he had gotten the amputation, and I was just super, super nervous about it. And I told him, I'm like, if you can, he was the kind of guy that he'd push himself even to his own detriment, right? He would hurt himself just trying to prove to you he could do something. And so I remember telling my dad, I was like, hey man, I'm going to be gone for 8 days. And if you can abstain from doing something stupid in 8 days, if you can stay safe for me in 8 days, I will sneak you out of the house and let you drive your truck. And he hadn't driven his truck in forever, and like he loved to drive. And man, I've got this really awesome video of it. But I came home, we got him in the truck. He's doing the whole thing, driving fine, and it was just super cool. But yeah, just funny little moments like that, just trying to incentivize him to like take care of himself.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's just getting this point across. Like a lot of your conversation you're talking about right now is loving your wife the way that your dad loved your mom.
Sure.
Like taking the memory and the character and the pieces that he instilled inside of you, all the benefit and good things that he has, and you're honoring them by carrying them into your marriage and the things that you care about, right?
Right.
I never met your dad.
Sure.
I was outside of his house multiple times while I was picking you up or doing other stuff, like we ran errands and stuff. I just never got the opportunity and the honor to meet him.
Right.
But I feel like from the conversations you've had about him, like I think it's pretty easy for me to see your dad through my interactions with you. Because I think
man.
that's like you tell stories and I'm like, yeah, that's a Travis thing. I only know it as a Travis thing, but clearly it's a Randy thing.
It's a Randy thing for sure. I think it's also almost like a grieving style that I have. So kind of like you were talking about like earlier, like death can be like a grenade going off or a bomb going off. And depending on how close you are to the blast might kind of determine how damaged you are or like how you process something.
Sure.
I wanted to like kind of reiterate, like there's no right or wrong way to grieve.
Sure.
I don't think, I think that maybe a wrong way to grieve might be like treating people badly because you're hurt. I think that there's a point to where it's like you're just being toxic at this point. But
sure, or self-harm or
self-harm, or
mm-hmm.
I think there's definitely like a limit to that statement. But for the most part, like I don't think that there's a wrong way to grieve somebody. And so my mom and my sister, I think they kind of grieve more silently,
mm-hmm.
and I think that's totally fine. And great, and I support it. But for me, the best way that I could grieve is to tell stories. And I think that that's kind of where I started to get a little bit of inspiration behind this podcast, because I would find, little things like I shared about, I took my dad's truck, for example, after he died. And so I shared about how my dad always had a white Ford F-150 my entire life in one of my posts. Or the other day I talked about how I got his watch from working 20 years at Gould's Pumps, and
right.
and what that signified for me. And I just shared stories for a whole year of just different things. Him getting stuck in the mud and this hook going through someone's back windshield from the toe strap, or I would just tons and tons of different stories. And it helped me kind of like, in a way, immortalize those stories, because
mm-hmm.
I can always go back to them. And so if I will never forget those stories and things that I remember, but they really helped me remember who he was and to process that thing, to share that with people, because I don't think that he should be forgotten.
Yeah.
And I want to give people the opportunity to tell their stories too. And I want to give people the opportunity to immortalize the stories of who they've lost into something like a podcast as well. And so that's kind of the entire point and premise of what this is supposed to be. I want this to be something where people can immortalize, record, share stories, let us bear witness to their grief of these people that they've lost, but to also build a community. So we've got this grief show community group, and I got so excited about this idea because I wanted to launch this on my dad's birthday. And so that's when this is coming out. This is, if you're listening to this on launch day, it's July 1st. It's my dad's 71st birthday. And I got this idea, or I really decided to pull the trigger on this. I bought the podcasting equipment. We already had podcasting equipment here at the company, but I bought this stuff so that I would do it.
Mm-hmm.
Like I needed to put some skin in the game so I would make this happen.
Sure.
Otherwise, it'd just be easy to put like to brush off and push off and push off and push off. So I bought my own podcasting equipment for this about 10 weeks ago and started making some posts in advance. And I already got like 60 members in the Grief Show community. I got this really beautiful post where I just asked some people to comment like a photo of their loved one and some really cool things about them. And it got a lot of comments. We got a lot of photos of people just like remembering their grandparents or like their mom or whoever else and like what they meant to them. And I don't know. I feel really, really strongly about this project. And I think that we're going to be able to bring a lot of help and healing and maybe some, at least some relatability to a lot of people.
Yeah. I think as we're like wrapping this up and stuff, I
Sure.
think that something that you said stuck out to me when you asked your mom, like for the eulogy, like tell me something that you want people to know about Dad. And I think that I'd love to give you the same opportunity right now at the end of it to just, what do you want? Like just condense it, wrap it up. Like how do you want him to be remembered, and what do you want the world to know about Randy Swearengen?
That he never quit. Ever. Whether his blood sugar was going crazy, whether his heart was giving out, or whether he was having to learn how to walk again, he never once quit. And that's what he told me in the hospital one day. He was really wrestling with what was happening to him, and I think that he knew that he could die soon. And this was probably 2 or 3 weeks before he passed, and he said, "I just want you and your mother and your sister to remember that I never, ever, ever gave up." And that's what I would want people to remember of him too, is that he never quit. I am so thankful for all of you that are listening to this first inaugural episode of the Grief Show. Caleb, thank you so much for being here. This was an emotional deal. This was way better than a monologue like I was trying the other day. But I'm so grateful that you were here for this, my brother. And yeah, I'm thrilled.
Yeah, Travis is going to be knocking out a ton more conversations with people and kind of following the trajectory. I think it's a lot of unknowns right now, but this community group that he started on Facebook, look it up. Like, be ready for stories of other people and reach out to Travis if you have a story to tell too. I think that's kind of the purpose and the point of it. I'm really excited about your project. You're going to crush it, man.
I'm amped, dude. I appreciate that. Again, if you guys want to join the Grief Show community, search for it on Facebook. It's a private group for now. That's kind of how I decided I wanted to navigate this, just because you never know what could happen with trolls, or try to contain it as much as possible. But if you want to join the Grief Show community, search for it on Facebook, and we'll let you in as soon as possible. In the coming weeks, we're going to be interviewing really awesome therapists like Cecily Gibson, and getting some people in here to kind of explain different concepts like ambiguous and compounding grief, and just different things I think will be really helpful for equipping us to grow as we grieve, but then to also give us this sense of relatability and community, that we're not alone in experiencing the deaths of others and loss and in whatever grief is. So anyway, stay tuned for more episodes of the Grief Show coming to you every week. Thanks, guys.